And the goal will be to talk a little bit about what we've heard earlier, right? And also the first 2 days of the event, but maybe like from actually how would you first describe the real for you, especially since the API mindset is going into enterprise. What's the role of the architect or the enterprise architect?
You can start.
Yep. So, afternoon. Yeah, I think there are quite a few things that an architect has to look at.
So maybe we can introduce each other. Who is what you're doing at what company? Just to be sure. Sorry for that. Yeah.
Shall we start with introductions then?
Yeah, introduction then, right?
Okay. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Kshitij Zulkantiwar. I am a digital solutions architect in Capital One. I look after the customer servicing channels, surprisingly both digital and non-digital. And this is the line I got in my feedback as well. I'm the one guy from tech who translates their business needs into workable solutions which are compliant with all the regulations and our internal security standards as well. And I'm responsible for all the applications that are helping support my area and the target architectures for them, as well as some domain level architectures. Slightly moving into business architecture as well. So let's see how that goes.
Let's see how that goes. And Chris, maybe you can.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wood. So currently working as an enterprise API architect on the Bank of APIs team at NatWest. I have to confess, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool freelancer, so I do various other things as well. I've written on Nordic APIs blog since 2015, and I'm helping out at the Open API initiative with some research around tooling.
Yeah, and so if we go back to the original question about the role of the architect, now we know where do you speak from.
Right, so how I have tried to approach these things is, whenever we have an idea or a solution to implement, we look at all the components that make up that solution. We try and be API first because, like most of the big companies, our backend is still mainframe. So look at APIs, whether they meet the functional need or not, whether we have similar APIs which we can reuse or build upon to make them more consumable, and then run through all the governance checks of GDPR, PCI, your audit logging standards, everything. So more design time heavy, but I think that pays dividend when it comes to delivery. We are able to deliver a lot faster without having to go back to the design or review again.
Yeah, no, totally get it. And Chris, would you add to that?
So in the old-fashioned days, I think what's become an enterprise API architect was called an API evangelist. So they do all the good stuff that Kshitij had just mentioned, but actually trying to lead the organization in how to do APIs well. What I mean, the API first practice obviously engenders a means to actually get APIs front and center in terms of the delivery process, and then doing everything that's good around that delivery process. So making sure you get your open API documents out there first before anybody starts writing a stitch of code. For example, we've heard about linting. Getting linting in place so that you actually make your standards enforceable, actually leading people. You may not write the code for a linter, you may not recommend Spectral, but you definitely want the policy in place so that you make sure that teams are actually going on that journey with you. But also aspects of governance. We hear about registers, right? It's no good just relying on your mates to keep in their head what APIs you've got in the organization. Actually leading the organization so that people understand the value of having an API register, knowing where the API description lives, knowing what SLAs are surrounding the implementation of that API when it's actually done as software, how many instances are running, that kind of stuff. So actually creating a holistic API ecosystem inside the organization, for me, is what an enterprise API architect would do.
So the role is just not to say no to everything, right?
Well, depends what day of the week it is, but no. I mean, I've always thought of it as an enabler. Traditionally, enterprise architects have been there to take the business vision and turn that into a reality. But with APIs, I think there's a twist. That enterprise API architect role is kind of technical. You've got to understand the idiosyncrasies of delivering in that way. And you've also got to sell upwards, being able to talk to the business, not necessarily about, oh, you must do REST. Oh, we've got to do ISO 222, because they don't care. They want outcomes, right? They want to know that those APIs you're going to create are actually going to give them what they want, in terms of the business goals, money, customers, whatever it is they're seeking to get out of a particular business initiative. So if you're selling upwards and you're making sure they understand the value, then essentially you stay on their budget line. So yeah, part enabler, part salesperson for me.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say part enabler, part sales, because so as more and more APIs, so you have internal APIs, you have external APIs, right? But the thing is, so the business is, and we see it at Apidays conferences. At the beginning, our conferences were just architects and developers. Over time, we went up to 40% of business background. So now the business is involved, but and you were mentioning business architecture, right? So what has been really did architect also had to make a shift to talk more in business terms?
Yeah, definitely. So as Chris said, sales job, a lot of time also goes into explaining the business, bringing them on board onto what more opportunities can be opened up just by understanding the APIs or how they are structured. So because of that gap in understanding, we started with API first, more from a technology side. But now we are trying to approach it in a way where we do business architecture, business capabilities, this is my business service, and then try and align your APIs towards those. That way, when tech has a conversation with product or business, they are both talking in same terms, which I think is quite powerful.
But why it's the architect who have to talk in business terms, and why not the business who have to understand technical terms, right?
There's always that. So there's another thing which I always struggle, and we have a banter about it, whether the architect should be in the tech line of reporting or whether he should be in the business line of reporting. One good thing that has happened recently is we have merged product and architecture now. So we are trying to see how we can leverage joint product and tech collaboration.
Yeah, you also, Chris, because also with your role as evangelist on APIs, on Nordic APIs, for a long time we've seen your articles and stuff. So you think it's the role of the architects to create a community of knowledge in the organization?
So, sorry, create
a community of knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, it's a shared ownership. Yeah. So again, this idea of the architect as the enabler, I mean, you need buy-in from the development community inside the organization to come on that journey with them. It's no good just standing at the top of an ivory tower, waving a flag saying, we've got some standards, guys, let's go. People actually want to see the benefits, right? So that whole journey about, okay, if we do standards well and we corral our APIs and we understand them, we know what we've got, then there's better outcomes for everybody. Those better outcomes might be simple things. We don't have to work so hard because we've got a bank of APIs that we know how to use. They're of a good quality. They're built to a good standard. We know where they've been deployed. So actually, having everybody bought into that vision of an internal ecosystem that really is, for want of a better word, useful, is really valuable. I mean, without that, you end up just creating new microservices exposed by APIs every day of the week. You have the normal thing about, well, I want REST and I want GraphQL. If you can actually all get together and make some informed judgments about what best fits the needs of the organization and how you can best surface the interfaces, let's not call them APIs, the interfaces you need to do business, then that's good for everybody.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen work really well is we have a community of practice of engineers or developers who are actually building these APIs. We bring them together as a community of practice, and then we bring in external stakeholders like product, architects, and sometimes even your legal teams, just by bringing all of them together, the awareness and the understanding increases tenfolds, and you get faster, turnaround cycles in all the other departments as well.
And for a funny story, at some point I was doing consulting, executive and strategy consulting for APIs, on APIs for exec people. And let's say 20% of people reaching me say, can you convince my exec teams or my sponsors or CEO, whatever, was on the business side, but 80% was on the tech side, was architects or chief architects say, like, well, tell us we need funding. Tell us that for the business requirement that they have, we need them to invest into a specific tech stack or tooling and everything. So if you explain the challenge, right, what's possible, then you will help us to do that. So yeah, actually, I think this is why the architects have to speak business, because they're most of the time not enough funded, understaffed, right? And this is why they have to convince, right?
Yeah, it's really a struggle to get funding for, let's say, a service mesh, for example, because business wouldn't understand how many new accounts are getting added because of that, right? What is it is going to bring 0.1% NPV to my account, but you have to prepare that business case and help them understand that over a long term that will deliver value.
Yeah.
So you have to talk business.
You have to talk business, right, Chris?
One of the words that I liked in your description of the team was that you have legal people involved. so actually having the legal team brought into the journey of delivering APIs is great, because so many organizations, legal teams kind of remote, they work in a particular way, you ask them to create terms of use for your APIs, they'll give it to subcontractors, external counsel, that's the word I've learned from the legal team. Basically because they're not, that team probably in a traditional organization isn't engineered for delivering APIs to a whole different set of consumers who possibly have never been a customer of the bank. So actually having the legal team involved in the process of creating APIs and a representation of them is brilliant, because it gets them in the right place to actually support you. So there's this kind of mutually supporting arrangement in the organization, which is brilliant.
Yeah. So if we go on the second part of the discussion, so we've talked the theme of the event from open banking to embedded finance. That means being open. That's being open to partners, maybe open to developers by regulation or for business requirement, to become a marketplace, ecosystem orchestrator, a platform or whatever. What was the level of discussion with the architects? We say, okay, we have been designed to be closed and secured, for the last 40 years. You asked us that, right? You asked us, the architects, to secure everything. Yeah. Now you ask us to be open, right? So, what happened? What was the level of discussion at this time?
That was quite interesting times when we were forced to open up the access, right? Because as you say, everything was designed to keep it secure in terms of demilitarized zone, and then your perimeter 1, your perimeter 2, your perimeter 3. So the idea of exposing something from your deepest part of the network to public internet drove a lot of difficult conversations, and glad it was pushed by the regulator. Otherwise, there was no way it would have got funding. But it still took a great amount of conversation in terms of how do you expose the data? What data do you expose? There were still some open questions around, yes, account data, but not all account data. So do we send that? Do we not send that? How do we package it? How do we register it? So gladly, they had to pull in architects into the conversation because we had made everything secure. They didn't have access to anything.
Yeah, gladly they put you in the discussion, yeah. And Chris, what's your opinion?
Well, having been on both sides of the fence, because I helped write the UK open banking standards, I felt the pain in many places. Yeah, don't blame me. The spelling mistakes are all mine. But I think a lot of the conversation is not just about the technology, but for open banking to start in the UK and in the EU, essentially banks were serving up data to a bunch of third parties they didn't know anything about. And they had to, because that's what the regulation, well, the standards that came out of the regulation told them to do. So actually, getting people on board with the idea of having a completely new role, which for many banks didn't exist before, is almost the hardest part. Now, that being said, there's also cases where it's a good driver for business teams to actually latch on to the goal of exposing APIs. We talked a lot about, talking to the business, but there is absolutely a desire to expose APIs to third parties for doing account aggregation or whatever the use case happens to be. So actually, it was quite easy to persuade some people that that was a good idea. And as usual in a kind of waterfall style organizations, getting the requirements right meant that the actual then getting through the security hoops and those kind of barriers became a lot easier. So yeah, I think there was two sides to that conversation, definitely from my experience back in 2017, where I was working at a bank in order to do our first open banking drop. But now, there is a big opportunity. The banks have their APIs out there, and actually leveraging what they've got. They've done the hard work in terms of this vertically impacting project that went like a ramrod through their systems. Now that's done, they have an opportunity to actually exploit that. So we talk a lot about, people in banks talk about monetization a lot, but actually finding the golden nuggets that allow you to do that, the whole open banking thing really opened up that opportunity. So it's about focusing on what products can you expose via APIs that are kind of separate to your existing user base, but actually make you money. So, and that conversation's still ongoing. I'm sure anybody who works in a bank is having that conversation about monetization and how to make what they had to do return money to them.
Yeah, but we talk about monetization. Sometimes you have the direct monetization. We sell the asset like and we pay, and you have indirect monetization, like it will augment our goodwill as a platform, as a market. If you have 100 apps, that will make people prefer our banking app versus others, and so they will prefer being customer of us, right? So the direct monetization is not always do you think it's the architect have to be in that discussion? Right? Have you been involved in monetization discussions or not at all?
Yeah, frequently.
As an architect,
As an architect, as doing the salesperson bit, a colleague from NatWest always says this thing about sweeping the floor for diamonds or whatever. You may come across some idea that sticks in your head, an initiative inside the bank that actually could make a return in terms of if that idea is exposed as an API and you start charging people for it. But frankly, it's not just as simple as that. You have to have all the moving parts in place. How do you identify that person as a customer? How do you invoice them? How do you meter what they're doing? Can you pull all the information into place in order to bill them the correct amount of money? What does the tiering model look like? Suddenly it goes from, that API can be exposed to external parties to all the other product stuff that's already in the bank, but when it's focused on one particular part of the architecture, it becomes quite difficult to actually manifest it in a really cohesive way. So it's not just like a slam dunk with direct monetization. There's all this other stuff that needs to support it. On the indirect side, I get it. Reputation capital is invaluable, especially now everybody wants to use an app, and having APIs to back that up that do what they say on the tin, are maintainable, always up, blah, blah, blah. But actually making the leap to say, I can actually measure the return on investment. That's a level of maturity that I think is very difficult to get to in a large organization when your first set of APIs are geared at non-monetary use cases. You've done what you needed to do to get across the line in many cases. So actually going from that to being able to, meter it correctly, bring a pricing model out, so on and so forth, it's not a big jump, but it takes time and effort and the right people doing the work.
So over the last 10 years at Apidays, we've seen people talking on ESBs, SOA and ESB, right? Web services, SOAP, XML, whatever. Then REST APIs, then GraphQL, microservices, service meshes, Kubernetes, data meshes. Now we'll see also people talking about that, right? And then on this kind of standard description, you know, you had Swagger that becomes Open API specifications, gRPC, right, mostly for microservice, and also GraphQL, async API for event-driven architecture, right? So the whole stack, like, does the business understand how fast and how different are the solutions currently available to solve business problems and the complexity of the work of the architect, right?
Yeah, so personally, I take it on myself to help business understand those complexities, and that is where a lot of challenges come, as Chris said, around monetization. If I'm trying to price something, how do I calculate how much it is costing me, right? And because eventually somebody is going to ask that question, right? So you need to have an answer, otherwise you'll not be able to monetize that properly.
So you do sales, you do finance. When do you do architecture? No, it seems you have a lot of hats, right?
Yes.
You know, you have to do a lot of things. Right?
Yes, that's the fun.
So at the end, we talk about technologies right here, but at the end, do you think the major blocker, the major challenge for a company to adopt, let's say, embedded finance, right? Is it technical or cultural? More technical or more cultural?
So in my view, it could be both. So like, unless you have technical capabilities, you'll not be able to demonstrate even a pilot of what a good outcome looks like. And you'll not get investment for that because you'll not be able to justify, right? So, but if in case you have some good set of technology on which you can do some pilot, then you will run into the cultural aspect where even though you have demonstrated, but culturally you are just not set up. So you'll have to approach it from both the angles, I think. It's very difficult for me to pick one.
Okay, if you consider it's a balance between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. You can't do anything without having the right tools in your toolbox. So having the means to rapidly take an API to market and demonstrate the art of the possible is what consultants always say, I think. But having that mechanism to actually be able to deliver at a technical level is really important. But yeah, I would say that unless you have support from the organization, if your goals are to be a business that's API first, you need support right up the top of the chain. You know, from who is at the top, the CEO, the Prince of Darkness, I don't know. But somebody who's going to say, you know, API is the way. There's a lot of discussion about the Bezos mandate. And, you know, it's the thing that everybody harks back to in terms of this organization based themselves on an architecture that actually allows them to be modular and deliver bits and pieces of things that surface business value over time. And it's true, it does. I mean, they aren't the best APIs in the world. You know, if you take a look at them, they're quite complex. I think they're not the best, but that's just my opinion, right? But having that edict from on high...
it's 20 years old, right? 20 years old.
Yeah. I'm not saying Jeff Bezos is the Prince of Darkness, but, you know, ultimately he said, let's do it this way, and there's one of the most valuable companies, if not the most valuable company in the world. So.
What I like about the Jeff Bezos mandate, you know, it was a mandate Jeff Bezos sent to all employees in 2002 that we need to use service interfaces for everything we do, and everything else that will go that will be transmitted between teams or application without service interface. He doesn't use the term APIs. He says service interfaces will be fired, right? So that was the mandate. He said that everything they do should be ready to be open to the external world and to the developer from the outside world, no exceptions. So he already had this idea that the outside is as much important as the inside, right? So that's really this idea. So that was the Jeff Bezos mandate. But when company name the mandate, say you are not Amazon, right? So you have to understand that. And also, with weapons of the past, we win wars of the past. You need to understand what you do now, right? It was a 20 years ago decision, so you will be a great 20 years old company, right? So that's the idea. So maybe for what last comment you could say for people who are working with the architects involving in open banking, embedded finance, when they will be back at the office tomorrow, right? What would be your advice after all what you've heard over the last 2 days?
I think one thing from me would be it's architects' job to move outwards and understand the capabilities that can be added onto their business, and then frame the business case, not a traditional business case, but try and build that awareness of where the industry is going and how everybody should be, or at least the right stakeholders should be brought on board.
Yeah, that makes sense, totally.
Yeah, I mean, for me, APIs are great. The role of the enterprise API architect is what it is. But ultimately, in a large organization, you've still got to do things that are quite traditional. The stakeholder management side of it, you just said the word stakeholders, is still really, really important. Don't get me wrong, I stink at stakeholder management, but I know how important it is in order to make sure you stay on the right budget line, to make sure that if you've got some initiative that you want to achieve, you need it funded, right? Organizations just don't work like magic. You actually need to be part of that process. So, salesperson working upwards, making sure that your initiative is funded is vitally important. So,
yeah, I think that's good. Two great comments. Thank you, Kshitij, and thank you, Chris, for that discussion. And again, if you have any questions or for Chris and Kshitij, yeah, they will be around for the next couple dozen of minutes. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.